Hello, everyone. In this section of Module 1, we'll be examining evil beings and mythical beasts. This is a direct extension of what Carl Jung was looking at. And he probably would have attempted looking at evil beings and mythical beasts if he had enough time in his life. And because they're an extremely important part of our actual psyche. And they exist in places that were actually specified in many ways by Carl Jung. So far, you have looked at the Jungian cycle and how individuation takes place as individuals absorb myths, activate the archetypes. The archetypes become alive in dramatic plays. We live our lives throughout these plays, and we grow with them as we do correct things, and we individuate. Right? And we overcome the dark centers of ourselves by uniting everything together, and we have a self in which emerges, which is very strong, and it can control all the forces very well for the power of good. Right? And one thing to remember that even things like the shadow are elementary dynamic forces which can be violent, but sometimes you may need to protect your family, and you'll need to promote violence sometimes, but in a very controlled sort of sense of way, right? And so think about how the Jedi works in Star Wars. There is violence, but it's always very controlled and only when necessary. So that's what we really mean by individuation. Well, let's think about some parts of the subconscious that Jung never went into and have a look at these. So look at the diagram right below this, and we'll figure out where these monsters are and how to map, an elemental structure of the mind onto Jung's model of the mind. So you see sort of an iceberg-looking structure down here. At the very top, you see at the conscious level, there's the ego. That's very much Jung's ego and very much Freud's ego, because this is more of a Freudian sort of model. But we're going to take off on this a little bit. Now, when it says the pre-conscious level there, it says the superego. That was Freud's sort of idea of the subconscious. But you can map that directly onto the personal subconscious of Carl Jung, right? It's basically the same thing. And those are where many of your ideas and morals and values sit up, which influence your ego's decision-making in life, right? And that's very important. Now, below that, at a very deeper level, at the unconscious level, the very unconscious level, this would be Jung's collective unconscious, right? This is way down there. This is the id. And many of those are the basic impulses, the sex and aggression, the immediate satisfaction. And the id is pretty much dominated by the shadow. Now, what's different about this model than Jung is that at unconscious level, it wouldn't be just the id in there. That would be all the other archetypes that are the anima and the animus, all the other things which are down there. And the id is supreme at the moment. When you're born, the id's the big one, and that's the one that needs to be brought in by the unification, the dramatic plays, bring the archetypes together and their polar opposites, let them play together so that you learn through these in the mythological plays, right? Well, monsters are a different sort of category of this. This is a way in which you realize how big the id actually is, right? A direct way of actually seeing it, because the monsters in which we produce are ourselves. This is just it. They are plays, dramatic plays of actually who we are. The book that you're going to be reading, Monsters, by David Gilmour here, he's a psychological theorist. And I have picked out a number of chapters for you to read. And before I go to the next diagram, let me explain a little bit about the chapters and what you're going to be encountering. All right? So I'm only going to have you read chapters 1, 2, 5, and 10. So 1 basically describes what monsters are, 2, how to approach monsters. Chapter 5 gives you sort of a look at one culture's monster, and those are this is basically a northern tribe of Americans, right? The Wendigo. Wendigo's sort of the northeast woodlands. This monster that looms large in their tales, their folk tales. There are many other chapters that describe monsters here. There's monsters of the Christian era. There's American monstrosity. There's all sorts of monsters from around the world. But for the limited time that we have in this class, we're going to stick to just the Wendigo. I think it's very explanatory of the general monster phenomena, and it helps you look at a typical Native American sort of response to monsters and why they produce them too. But if you have more time and you want to read the rest of them, they're fantastic. Now, chapter 10 is when we hit real pay dirt. This is the one when Gilmore goes into theoretically exactly what these things are, and where this psychological model that I've just looked at, what I showed you, really comes into play. But he takes it one step further. This is why he's a theorist. He's saying there's something that guys like Jung miss because he never really understood monsters, really what the power of these things are, what they're trying to really tell us about ourselves, and the power of monsters for disciplining ourselves, right? So let's have a look at the second little diagram I have here. So you see the triangle here? So you have your ego, and your ego is the one at the very top, right? And it's making decisions, and the superego is the thing below, right? And those are all your values. You learn how to be a good person, and you know, and all of a sudden, and it has all these values about what you want to do. But somehow there's a lower level, and it sneaks in and go, oh man, if we could only do that, we could have everything. Screw those motherfuckers over there. Sorry for my language, but that's the way it is. It's really hostile. And you know, and your ego's like, well, wait a minute, I had this impulse to do the wrong thing, but I could get everything. And the superego says, no, man, you got to be nice. You got to be nice. Well, I think that's the way life is for everyone. There's a little devil on one shoulder, there's a little angel on the other, and you're always trying to figure out what's doing right. And that's the antagonism that exists in life in humans, right? And that's the ego. The ego has to decide what's right between those impulses that are coming up. Well, sometimes the ego, to be able to live, and that's you in this society, needs to have the superego be right most of the time. But the ego needs to look at the id. It needs to see exactly what it is and understand the value of actually slaying it, right? And actually the valor that can come from it. You can be recognized for, you know, slaying your inner demon. So what's the inner demon? Well, that happens to be the monsters, right, that cultures produce. Therefore, they're archetypes. And that brings us right back to Jung. He missed one. So there is the monster archetype, and that's really the deep shadow, and that is the most powerful one. That's the one with all the negative energies, and the one that's probably been around the longest in all evolutionary history, because monsters do very special things, which you're going to learn now, the way in which they go about terrorizing humans. So what Gilmore does in the end of the book is he realizes that if the id's down below and that monster's down there, there has to be another psychological process that brings the id to the surface, that lets the ego look at it, right, wholeheartedly, without it being too much of a reflection on oneself, but a metaphor. So he posits a different process. A process has been looked at, and it's called the super id. And the super id is a way of the superego going down and fusing all the opposites and contradictions about the id self nature, all about the self, by bringing up the monstrosity of the id and how embracing that for the ego would end up into utter destruction, and even debasing the person who does it, you know, into moral anguish. And that's what the monster is, and the super ego is something that, sorry, the super id is that which delivers that image to the ego. And those are the monsters in which we create. It has to be delivered somehow. So these projections that we have are actually the monsters within ourselves, our deepest fears, and our job every time is to slay them. So let's have a look at how Gilmore handles this in his book and just those chapters. And I will try to get back and do a wrap-up of this below after you finish this stuff, and give you a couple points in which I think you should have picked up out of this for a summary. So let's get at it and see how you do. I hope you enjoy it. Bye.